Very nice picture you get there. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. The reason I invited you today is because we've had quite a few conversations in the past. You are a marketer I admire because of your background, because of everything you've achieved in the past, because of the uniqueness of everything you bring to the table. And I'll get to that. It's not just empty words. There is a reason why I'm using the word uniqueness, but we'll get to that later. But let me just talk a little bit about your background, because not everyone may know you, and feel free to correct me if I missed something. You spent quite many years at Cisco from the very start of your career, and you actually started with managing localization, which tends to link to the uniqueness I was talking about earlier, all the way to director of global strategy and advocacy. Then you moved to Citrix, Senior Director, Brand and Content. Then there was also RingCentral, where we had the chance to work together for a short while doing VP of Growth and Corporate Marketing. You happen to speak French. I don't remember if we ever talked in French together in the past, but I know you've spent quite some time in Avignon, and you happen to come back every now and then as well. And as of now, you are advisor of a few companies and associations where you're super active. Is that a good summary? Am I missing anything major here?
Yeah, that's a great summary.
So that's a pretty long marketing career you've got. Did you plan any of that, or did it just happen that way?
It definitely was not planned. I think being honest, you went to school. I actually have a French degree. So not only do I speak French, I have a French degree. I thought, I want to do economics. I want to do, business. And I, found the localization industry, and it was a small industry. And, I worked for a small company in San Francisco, and I got to do AR and PR and AP receivables and sales support and production and through the course of that and making connections as you will, someone ran into a colleague at Cisco, and this woman wanted to start a department, and she said, "Oh, then I know who you should reach out to." And so, it was a little bit of by accident. That's how I originally got to Cisco. And I think this is a thing that is a little scary, right? You're in an industry, and someone's asking you, especially tech at that time, to go try something different. And it's one of these. Well, it's an adventure. Let's go make it happen. And the reason I stayed so long at Cisco is I then had an opportunity to really pivot the translation localization into advertising and marketing and brand strategy, coming full circle, being able to do a rotation in Paris using my French and helping brand and, working with media and creative agencies in Paris. So, you look back and it was a wonderful closed circle on that.
I can relate to that because the very early days of my career, I was a web designer. I had studied marketing, but no plan at all to do marketing. And I just got that opportunity to actually start doing marketing, move into an actual marketing role, do more and more. But I did not stick around for so many years. I think I stayed for 4.5 years. You stayed for almost 2 decades at Cisco. That's very rare nowadays. You see most profiles, people stay 1, 2 years, 3 years at most, and they jump because it gets you a better title or more money. But you've been loyal to the company for a very long time. So I get that part of it is, well, you get opportunity after opportunity, and each opportunity being even more interesting than the previous one and giving you the ability to try new things. But is it something you would advise people to do today in 2024? Is that a good idea to stick around with the same company for a very long time? Or is it actually a good strategy to kind of jump left and right every few years?
I think it's a personal choice. I think for me, as you said, what I kind of grew with the company, right? The company when I joined was 13,000 employees. We were hiring 1,000 employees a month. It was high pace, it was crazy. It was, it went from sort of the wild, wild west. And, and then all of a sudden you needed the marketing and you needed the strategy and you needed the priorities. So for me, it worked in where I was in my career and where the company was, right? The company continued to grow, ultimately being close to 50 billion, by the time I left, right? So it went from, 13,000 doesn't sound, small to a lot of people, but when you consider how large Cisco became, it was an opportunity to kind of grow with them. But it was a structure that had the international focus, which was a passion of mine. And so being able to translate some of that experience and being able then to apply it to various roles. And so I think for me, over time, I ultimately left to also be able to expand discipline-wise, experience-wise, and that's what Citrix was offering, was more disciplines, a deeper background, a wider sort of path to corporate marketing, right? To have more of those disciplines. But I think it really is a personal choice. And, if you can look in your environment, I'm very big with my employees in particular, that if there's a passion project that, it's something they've always wanted to do, can they look at their job and do it as a pilot? Can they test something that's a passion of theirs that keeps them interested, but at the end of the day, it helps support the team? And so, I think for today, it's much more common to make those changes, but I also think you have to look at it from, are you able to grow personally? Are you able to grow professionally? And that tells you, do they treat you well? That really impacts, how long you stay, you stay where you are.
So it's not about looking at your watch and counting whether it has been a year, 5, 10, 15. It's about, do I have the right opportunities? Do I keep growing? And am I enjoying what I'm doing, basically?
Exactly. I mean, I think that, there's always an opportunity, right? Pandemic comes along. There's always an opportunity to make moves for titles. And, at the end of the day, is it your passion? Is it going to make you happy? Because it's only a part of your life, right? And I think that's important to keep in mind, as you said, as I've been kind of working with some of these little startups, it's sort of digging in and, looking at their positioning and who do they want to be and who do they really want to sell to, and say, hey, I think you actually want to sell to these people instead, right? Taking a look at who's that ICP. So it's finding those things that bring you energy. And I had there's a great HR leader at the very end of my time at Cisco who sort of had this 4-box quadrant. And, if you're really good at it and you're passionate about it, that's where you want to spend your time. He said, if you're really passionate about it, but you're not very good at it, that should be your hobby, not your job, right? So, there are things in our jobs, right? I happen to be very operationally focused for someone who's done kind of a lot of the brand work, but I can do the work and I'm good at it. It doesn't bring me as much passion and energy. And I think it's that return of the energy, because you only have so much to give, right? So.
Agreed. So it's good you're starting to dive a little bit into marketing and positioning and all of that, because there is something that I love about your background is you've been doing growth, pipe gen, this kind of activities, and you've been doing corporate strategy and corporate marketing as well, which I'm always wondering, where do you draw the line? Where do you stop doing? Because so corporate marketing kind of looks as the background function, the center of excellence that kind of services everyone, that dictates the guidelines, that defines a brand, that's basically the heart of the company. But when it comes to pipe gen, we start looking more at metrics and ROI and all this kind of things. And when you have roles, and you've had a few roles in your career where your title kind of cover both sides of the equation, where do you draw the line? When do you think, I need to build a brand, I need to build meaning? And when do you start thinking these dollars are going specifically to generate leads, to generate pipe, to generate revenue? How schizophrenic do you have to be to make these two things work?
I will challenge the question a little bit. And if you haven't generated interest, you're not going to generate demand. So I think that is part of sometimes I think the misstep when you kind of enter an environment and you're looking to see what they're trying to do. It's very important that, first you have goals. And if you took a look at my profile, I'm like, if you don't have goals, don't tell me what your metrics are. I don't care. If I don't care what you're measuring, if you haven't had goals to start with. And it's the junk metrics really are maybe a pet peeve is how I would call it. But I think it's really critical. It is a blend. And that's why I think integrated marketing is such a key component of marketing today, which is you have to look at the entire funnel, because you can work really hard in demand gen, but if someone's not interested in you or they've never heard of you, even worse, right? It's going to cost you a lot more at the tail end of that demand. And, a couple of examples working with specifically, with media partners, they've come to us and said, you have a lot of touches as a business, but you don't have the right touches, right? And so you haven't engaged an audience early enough. You're not in the consideration set. If you're not in the consideration set, right, there's all sorts of metrics that tell you you're not going to be in the final RFP. So it is really this art and science of finding that balance. And at the end of the day, it's why I love that concept of revenue ops, because you're all aligned to those accounts that are the most critical to your business, and you're going in together. So it isn't fluffy top of the funnel. It's really engaging these audiences through that journey.
But there is something that I've experienced in the past in small companies, in large ones as well, actually, where when you start struggling a little bit with budget, or when your finance team is kind of in charge of your marketing strategy, very often the first thing that happens is you look purely at ROI. And when you look at ROI, only what brings revenue is considered as something to keep, and anything that cannot be linked back to the revenue, because it influences, because it's top of funnel. You and I, we know it's incredibly important, but if you're not in marketing, you may not realize it's incredibly important. So you focus only on what brings dollars. And I've seen startups making this mistake over and over again, focusing exclusively on what is supposed to bring the revenue, leaving all the branding, leaving all the tofu, top of funnel part of the exercise, and then maybe not suffering in the first few days or the first few weeks, but a few weeks or few months later, starving, because if you don't create the demand, then you'd never get the pipe at the end of the day. Since you work with associations and startups, and you're an advisor and a mentor for many people, what's your advice when you see, first, do you see that ever? And if you do, what's your advice to people or company doing that?
Yeah, I think it's common, right? It's common from a small company or a startup. You need to prove your revenue. You need to get your sales. If you have your investors, I think it is that balance of the short game and the long game. And the challenge is, if you don't invest anything that is a long game, the pipeline dries up, or the work to get that pipeline at the tail end is much harder, because you haven't told them why you're different than your competitors. Content can do a lot, right? Your blogs, posts on LinkedIn. It doesn't even have to be that expensive. There's ways to do owned efforts that can start that process, to start building that trust. And I think a lot of people just jump into, I have to go generate a lead. Well, you can go generate a lead, but if you haven't told them why your product is any better, why they should trust you, and you're new, ultimately, like I mentioned before, you're not on the consideration set. It's a lot harder to break through and be that. Yes, you see a lot of, we're the best, we're the first, nobody cares. What are you doing for their business, right? So spending that time, and I think doing the research and social listening on those topics, it's not that cost prohibitive to start some of those, let's call it brand building, in the term of they just know who your brand is. It's not TV advertising, it's not radio spots, it's not print ads. It's just making an introduction to what you stand for. And I do see that, right? The helping a couple of these companies, it's, they're well established in sales. Where's your content? Where's your content? And how robust is your website? Because, people are doing the work on their own, and sales is one of the last, I would say, experiences that someone wants to necessarily have. They want to know as much as they can, and then they want to decide if they want to do business with you.
I would agree with that. You kind of stole my thunder with your previous answer, because I did go to your profile and I did find quite a few nuggets there that I collected and wanted to ask you about. The first one of them being exactly, if you don't start with goals, your metrics are meaningless, which is something I love because it just makes so much sense. In marketing, I've seen personally our role evolve a lot in the past decade or so. And I don't know if it's because I've changed industry multiple times. So maybe it is the industry I'm in right now that is incredibly data centric, which was not so much the case 10, 15 years ago when I started in my career. But we have all these goals and metrics and dashboards. But ultimately, if you don't have a goal, metrics don't mean anything. Especially when you start something new, if you have all the metrics in place, you track everything. But if you don't know what good looks like, then whatever you track, it doesn't tell you anything. I love that you put this on your profile. How important is it? Something you have on your profile for 20 years already, or is it something you put last week? How important is it in your daily marketer's life?
It's critical because it is surprising how many times you'll walk into a meeting, a scenario, and like, well, what, it's like, we have all these leads. Was that your goal? Was that your goal, just volume, or was it quality? And that's, again, I think why the concept of revenue ops, where marketing and sales are really agreeing on size of the deals, the number of customers, this joint partnership, because, you hear it all of the time, right? I was just coming off of a roundtable. Marketing's delivering leads and sales is questioning whether they're of any value or not. And so, really driving that, do you agree? Is this the right quality? But it is something that I've seen it over and over and over. We could drown in the metrics that are available to us today from various systems. Are they the right metrics in the first place? Do they even matter? So, I think it's so critical that you're starting with these company goals. What are the company goals? And then what are those marketing goals that line up to the company goals? And then how are you measuring it? Because a lot of times you kind of skip that alignment to the company goals, and you have so many things you could be doing. And so you think, web traffic or SEO or SES, is that important? And I think where it comes into play, I think, from my experiences, using this concept of multi-touch attribution, so you can actually see they digested the content, they came to the website, they did do this banner, they've shown up for a demo. Then you can actually say, okay, 5 of these marketing channels are contributing to, where this customer is in that pipeline. And I think we have so many metrics available today to us, but it's really important to identify, where is it important and why?
So you said something here. You said multi-touch attribution. I don't know if it's just me or not, but multi-touch attribution sounds like the holy grail that every company is talking about, but I've never seen one company doing it very well. I've seen many companies doing it to some extent that gives you some information. I've never seen anyone actually doing it the way you describe it, which is the way it should be done, where you actually see the multiple touch points and how it works and how one influences the other. Is that just a unicorn, or is that something that you've seen, that you've experienced, that you've implemented in your own companies at some point?
So we did implement it and it really was a justification of, paid media. What I would caution is it's not a panacea, right? It's not going to solve all your problems. But I think what we were able to do is you're able to see the long tail of some media that, it launched in April. Well, it actually had an impact, in September. And so being able to have that long view, you can see the duplication between certain channels. Are you cannibalizing SEO and SEM by taking a look at this? But ultimately, I will sort of jump on the bandwagon of, I think MTA really is about optimization of spend. I don't think it has all of the answers, but it's sort of over time if you have enough data. But you need to be able to measure your content quality and your creative quality as well, because it's a scenario of garbage in, garbage out. You can measure everything, but if someone's not clicking because the creative is not impactful or the content's not interesting or it's too long, you need to understand the quality of the quote assets that you're looking at in that attribution, because if it's not good quality, at the end of the day, you're not necessarily getting all that you need to out of what an MTA can tell you.
That's funny because you're kind of going into the second nugget I collected on your profile, which is measure, refine, repeat. And I love that one because I was using the word schizophrenic earlier talking about marketers, and I think that's every aspect of marketing. You have to be bipolar in some way. What I love about marketing is every day is somehow different. You could be doing some design review and write some content an hour later, and then think about the LinkedIn ad or look at SEM keywords or refine your website or look at your lead flows. Every day could be completely different. Yet, while you have this incredible variety of tasks that makes your job never boring, you still have to have the rigor to test, refine, analyze, make the changes, launch and test again, and do this cycle over and over again. And that's why marketing is both a routine and something incredibly creative and different every day. Is that one of your main motto in everything you're doing? The measure, refine, then repeat?
Yeah, I think I've been on the receiving end, over time of you launch something and it didn't work, and you throw it out, and you have to ask the question, why didn't it work? Was it the timing that it was released? Was it the quality of whatever? Was it the story that wasn't believable? What is it? Doing fewer things and refining it and getting it down to what exactly is at the heart. What can make this better? And it's a thing that I use with my teams, where I want them to experiment and I want them to try new things, but I always ask them. I always say, I want you to make the quarter-inch turn on a project before you get into that second quarter. So you're making those changes. So you don't get to an end of a fiscal year and find out, wow, that didn't work, right? You're constantly looking at what's working, what do we want to do more of in this program? It was a great, innovative idea, but at the end of the day, it's just not working with our target audiences. And so this concept of you constantly improve yourself, those quarter-inch turns, and then you don't have to make that full 360, revolution at the end of a fiscal year, because you're keeping tabs on what part of it is good. And if you've done it really well, you keep it going the next year, so you're not starting from scratch, right? You already have a gem, and you just build off of that.
It's not only great because it forces people to recycle what they have and think through and really test till they are really sure it's either working or not working, but it saves tons of resources for the company taking this approach. Something I've implemented in the past that I thought worked beautifully was a mix of two methodologies. The fishbone approach, where you got all the different types of problems that your campaign or whatever program you're working on that could have, and then you try to analyze one by one. Could that be because the audience is wrong? Could it be because the budget is wrong? Could it be because the channel is wrong? Could it be because the content is wrong? And then you analyze one by one, you define which one you believe may be wrong, then you test it. And then if that's not it, or if it doesn't fix it, then you move to the next bone on the fish. And the second thing I implemented was around A/B testing culture. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, right? You just don't give up, even if it's working. Actually, the beauty of it is, if it's not working, try to fix it before you give up. But even if it's working, it could probably work even better. There might be a few things you could try. So I really love your approach on this one. There is another nugget though on your last one, I promise, on your profile that I loved, which is plan for the predictable and prepare for the unknown. Because you have people who love to feel in control of everything, and you have people who just don't like to have a plan and just go along with the flow. But I think that's a fantastic approach. Plan for the predictable, because there are things within your control, but shit happens. how does that translate in your daily life, managing a team or managing a marketing strategy?
A lot. I think this is pandemic influence for sure. If I think about it, it was prior to that, but really the pandemic brought it home, where there are target audiences that your company are always going to be going after. Those are your foundational motions. That is your bread and butter. That's your that's your holy grail right there. That is predictable. That is something you can plan to. That is something you can do more of. That's, you want to stretch into new target audiences with those profiles. And then, as you said, business changes. And now all of a sudden you want to go after an executive audience. Well, that's where you start being flexible, right? You start having these agile programs, these pilot programs. You bring in a strategic partner to help you launch it. So you're not trying to introduce your brand, tell them why you're so great. You have credibility with this partner, but it's really important that you're ready to flex. And we did one of my teams, we had these pulse surveys, and we did research on a quarterly basis, which was our foundational research. We were going to stick to our guns on this topic. And then we had these pulse surveys. What's happening in the world today? What are people thinking about employee experiences? What should we be doing for agile content? So it's really that a lot of my, immediate social listening, what are the audiences talking about, but also using these very quick agile surveys to get a finger on the pulse of, this particular audience really cares about it, or what are they seeing about it? Do they want hybrid work, or do they want to return to the office, or whatever it is? But it allowed us to have the insights to do this flexible, agile content and creative that then resonated, with these new audiences, or it was maybe sometimes with the same audiences in our IT audiences, we're getting this new pressure on how do we deliver better employee experience, right? And so I think it is the concept of trying to do an annual plan where everything's going to stay, it's never going to happen again, right? For a lot of reasons. And there's just, there are things that long-term strategic planning, and then there's this agile planning. And we would do that on a quarterly basis, just to make sure, in some cases, things like security were always going to be, a theme that we needed to be focused on for the year. So.
You mentioned a few times the words content and creatives, which brings me back to the original topic, why, in my eyes, you are very unique, because you're one of the very few marketing person I've met and worked with that has a good understanding of what localization means, and that understands that localization doesn't mean translation. And that is a huge difference that many people I've worked with don't understand or look at me with big eyes when I say that localization is not translation. It's beyond translation. There is much more to that. Do you care to elaborate a little bit on your vision of localization and why that was an important part of your early career that you brought with you from role to role?
Yeah, I think sometimes you can get into a big, right? Cisco is a big environment, and I think especially as you're trying to launch in new countries and to make those connections, the critical human part of your story has to be local. And so, it's always this balance of how can I do something that will resonate? So, going to the process of, I have a concept, I'm going to test the concept in multiple countries, and I'm going to get the insight on what works, what doesn't work, and then what flexibility do I allow? So it looks like one brand internationally, but it has, I call it a freedom within a framework. So there's some freedom to make the changes. Maybe it's an image, right? Facial hair in certain countries, a man versus a woman. We did a launch, and we did a superhero kind of idea, but the background was we used Singapore, and we used Tokyo, and we used New York, and we used Paris, and we used Frankfurt, just so that it had a local feeling. And it doesn't mean you have to reproduce everything. There are creative ways to look at that, but it's very important to, the number one sport, just as an example, in the world. It's not what you would go for in the United States, right? So I think it's getting those nuances, right? And learning things like double negatives in particular countries, colors that are, it's superstitious or it's auspicious. There's this whole realm of things to consider. But at the end of the day, I think it's moving that concept of, I'm not trying to go establish a sales office in a country. I'm trying to establish business in a country. And at the end of the day, that's about people. And so I think it is, there are a lot of ways that you can approach it, and some get more expensive. When we did a high level brand and we wanted it to be human, it had to have a lot of originality for every country. But in some cases, we found a concept that it was pretty universal. And so we just had to make some little tweaks on how we approached it. But I think it's, I think it's part of it, that's where the global strategy part came in, evaluating what needed to be done and feeding that back, I think kind of back to your right, to some of the other centers of excellence. The creative team at the time, which had a US agency, we had an arm in London to help us with that. It was actually even beyond localization. It was transcreation, really customized, campaigns. So
if I may make a suggestion, I think that term of yours, freedom in a framework, deserves its place on your profile as well. You're talking about localization. Most of the time, small companies, they can't do it themselves. Very often you have to externalize. You've had roles where you were in charge of advertising, content creation, all of this. When do you decide that something is better in-house or it's better external? Is it based on the context? Is it based on the size of the company? Is it based on your budget, the size of your team? Is it better to recruit or to externalize? What's your view on this, and what's your recommendation to marketers wondering the same thing?
Yeah, I definitely am a believer in the hybrid, because I think agility, internal resources can offer you that. So, I think that is important. I think several companies have been extremely successful in building in-house creative teams, right? But it's an investment, and you have to have this massive volume. I look at Cisco and I can say it was the right move. A lot of the work when I was there was external. We had a small group. They've expanded over time. I think the volume, the number of products, and ultimately number of events that they do, it makes sense, right? And so I do believe there's a value to both, and it really depends on how much you're doing. I think what external gives you is external creative agencies in particular, is they're dealing with a lot of different clients. They're seeing trends in technology. They're seeing trends in themes, right? And so you get this pool of people who have maybe a wider view of the world, and they might challenge you a little bit more on, well, this is what we want to say. It's like, well, is that what anyone wants to hear, right? And so I think it's really, there's a balance, and a lot depends on how much you need to do. Like, first party research, of course you're doing it, do it with a partner that has a brand name, because they can help up level your brand. But if you're going to do, you need a high volume of creative assets, and it's a really short turnaround, or to your point, A/B testing to modify some of this. I do think there's definitely a time and a place for both. But I believe, and I also believe from a media perspective, that having someone who is constantly talking to new agencies and the world of media changes so rapidly that if you don't have somebody kind of on your extended team that is keeping tabs on new ways to go to market, you are going to miss something. Because the reality of internal teams is you put your heads down and you have to execute, right? Because it's usually high volume execution. So I think it's important to have that partnership, that external partnership that kind of helps you keep tabs on what's new.
So it's about keeping a hybrid mode where you have some brains and hands in-house that can do the work, but externalizing because it brings you flexibility. We're back to what you were saying earlier about prepare for the unknown. You might need super high volume of creation, and it would be good to have a partner. And it's also about keeping an eye on trends and the market and what's happening, and that external agencies can help with. I would agree with that. I had 50 more questions for you, but the problem is that we're pretty much at time already. If you don't mind, I have one last question I'd like to ask. If you were to give tips, to give suggestions to someone fresh out of school about to start a marketing career, with your experience today, what is it you would tell those new marketers that are trying to build their career, have no idea where to start, what to do, what to care about? What's your piece of advice here?
I think if you're just starting out, find something that you have a passion for, right? Whether it's environmental or healthcare, or find something where you have a passion. And I think something that I have definitely done over time is take the vendor calls, take the meetings with vendors who have new solutions, because you may not need it today, but you might be sitting in a meeting and a colleague has a need and don't know how to do this, and you've met with an agency that that might have a new idea. It also offers you an opportunity to do maybe a stretch project, or you work on a collaborative team to solve this problem. I think it's one of the things that don't get too busy to take those inbound agency calls, because a lot of times you can put them in the back of your mind, and you'll use them in the future, and to great success.
I'm laughing because I think that's not a piece of advice that's applicable only to fresh grads. I'm definitely going to take that one, because I never take the time. And that's so true, though. You're absolutely right. The few times I do, I don't necessarily need it right now, but it usually pops up a few days, weeks, months, years later. But I have a solution to a problem, and I don't have to search for it, because I've had the right meeting with the right people. So fantastic piece of advice. A huge thank you for that. Thank you for your time, Susie. I hope that was pleasant for you as well.
It was wonderful. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.